An old man came to the police station and said that he had not found his daughter for half an hour. The police asked him about his daughter's age. The old man said she was 26 years old. The policeman immediately thought that the old man was worrying too much, but another policeman took the photo. She immediately saw the girl walking into the woods. Behind her, a man was chasing her. She was then attacked by the man. Back in reality, the policewoman woke up in bed. The bell in her hand kept ringing. She realized that she had entered the consciousness of the missing girl. She was in danger now. Kim Dan did not tell the old man the truth, but only comforted him that they would definitely find his daughter. Then Kim Dan followed her memory and went up the mountain, but the people there said that they had never seen the girl in the photo. Meanwhile, the police were holding a meeting. In recent months, the number of victims being harmed on the mountain has been increasing, and the situation is really serious. These people are all of similar age. It is very possible that they were harmed by someone else. Then the perpetrator faked the scene. Jakey speculated that the perpetrator could be a man, a person with a thin appearance, a cleanliness problem, and easy access to girls. Therefore, it is very likely that he works in the service industry. When checking the camera, Jakey discovered that all three victims were in the same taxi. They immediately identified the license plate of the suspicious car. At this time, Kim Dan was investigating the taxi driver. When he looked at the photo, he said that he had never met this girl, but his face started to twitch. Kim Dan remembered in her consciousness that the perpetrator had the same seizure disorder as this person. Then she looked at his clothes and appearance. She was sure that this man was the perpetrator. She carefully asked him to show her the car's dash cam. The driver was very cooperative. He invited her into the house to use the computer to watch the video of the trip. While Kim Dan was concentrating on watching, the driver in the back put on his white gloves and slowly approached her. This morning, he had just picked up a customer. The customer complained that he drove too slowly. Then the customer kicked his seat hard. The driver immediately stopped the car, and his face became expressionless. Then his whole body started to convulse. Then he calmly put on his gloves. While he was staring at the customer in the back seat, a police patrol car suddenly passed by. That's how the customer escaped death. The driver also calmed down, so he smiled and continued driving. That evening, he was investigated by the police for a missing person case. Now he put on his gloves again. His face was expressionless as he approached the policewoman. Suddenly the window shattered. A strange man poked his head in. It turned out to be Jay Key, a member of the major crime squad. The police had surrounded the driver's house. Because the surrounding mountains had been filled with the bodies of girls, the driver was put under investigation. Jay Key felt very strange because the police had spent months investigating to identify the suspect, but Kim Dan had found him through just one photo. It turned out that Kim Dan was a policewoman with the ability to see the future, but none of her colleagues knew about this, so in response to Jay Key's question, she only said that her intuition was very accurate. In the interrogation room, the driver put on an innocent expression. The police only had 48 hours to interrogate him. Jay Key picked up a cup of coffee and deliberately poured it on him. The driver's face began to twitch. He was clearly very unhappy. Then Jay Key began to force him to confess. Jay Key discovered that his arm had many broken bones. This proved that he had been severely abused as a child. After growing up, there was a high possibility that he would become mentally unstable. This reminded him of his painful childhood. Seeing that he was about to lose his temper, Jay Key took out the victim's photo and kept stimulating him. The driver was about to collapse. At this moment, he suddenly took a deep breath and calmed down. Jay Key chuckled and crouched under the table. Then, Jay Key took off the driver's 2 shoes and handed them over to the forensic department. The forensic department was very cooperative during the investigation. They discovered that the shoes not only smelled, but also had pollen on the soles. This type of pollen is only found in Korea and comes from a type of plant that only grows in the mountains. The police immediately went up the mountain to search. Sure enough, they quickly discovered the body of the missing girl. She was harmed in the same way as the previous victims. When they checked, they found blood on the victim's fingernails. This proved that she had injured the perpetrator. The police also found scratches on the driver's neck. They quickly collected DNA samples, but when the results came out, everyone was shocked. The DNA of the 2 people was completely different. This situation made the police wonder if they had made a mistake, or if it was all just a coincidence. Without solid evidence, everything became vague. At this time, the suspect was enjoying a delicious meal. Meanwhile, the victim's father saw her body and immediately collapsed. When the perpetrator was about to be declared innocent, Kim Dan suddenly burst into the interrogation room. She grabbed her own neck and said strange words. She affirmed that life is to prove the mark of love, and death is to celebrate the greatness before everything falls apart. What greets you is not departure but brave sacrifice. Those were the words the killer said to the girl before he committed the crime. Kim Dan also described the process of his crime. His body began to lose control. Kim Dan wanted him to confess, but at this moment, the bell on her hand rang again. Kim Dan immediately understood that tonight another girl would die at the hands of this pervert. He would be released. Then she used her superpower to see the scene where he would commit the crime. Because there was no evidence, he was declared innocent and released. When he was about to walk out of the police station, Kim Dan suddenly pulled out a gun and aimed it at him. The colleagues next to her were extremely shocked. Because this was the police headquarters, she dared to hold a gun and threaten innocent people. Kim Dan shouted that he would harm people tonight, but no one believed her. The driver raised his hands and slowly approached her. Then he whispered in her ear that she should run away quickly. She immediately felt dizzy. Memories from her childhood suddenly came back to her mind. She realized that 20 years ago, she had known the man in front of her. Seeing the murderer calmly walk out of the police station, Kim Dan hurriedly chased after him, but Jae-ki stopped her. He criticized her unprofessional behavior. He emphasized that without evidence, there was no way to make wild speculations. He even pushed her to the ground. He had no idea that the next target of the perverted murderer was someone very close to him, and that was none other than his sister. Releasing the suspect today was a wrong decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. At this moment, his sister was at home waiting for him to get off work. The murderer stood below the building and used binoculars to observe. Her heart was filled with fear. When she looked outside again, she realized that he had disappeared. At this moment, he appeared in front of her house. The corners of his mouth kept twitching. Jae-ki tried to call his sister, but no one answered. When he opened the door and walked in, his sister was hanging from the ceiling. Jae-ki collapsed, hugging his sister's body and crying loudly. His confidence was gone. He truly regretted his arrogance. 2 years passed quickly. Jae-ki suffered a great shock and became a beggar. All day he just drank and did nothing. Meanwhile, Kim Dan trained non-stop and became a famous policewoman. Today, a group of thugs came to cause trouble for Jae-ki. Kim Dan passed by and saw it, so she immediately rushed out to deal with the thugs. She did not expect that the person she saved was Jae-ki. Thanks to fate, they met again. Jae-ki was very curious why 2 years ago, Kim Dan could be sure that the driver was the culprit. She had seen everything, but she could not explain. She just said that her intuition was very accurate. Over the years, Jae-ki had never given up on catching the murderer. He had always been on the lookout for the murderer. The next day, Kim Dan was invited to the memorial service. Unexpectedly, something strange happened. A woman appeared covered in blood. She was the host of the memorial service. Everyone couldn't believe their eyes. The person they thought had been dead for more than 200 days had suddenly come back to life. The police also held an emergency meeting because the case had been closed and the murderer had been arrested. The victim suddenly appeared, so they had to investigate this matter thoroughly. The girl's name was Ji-hyun. There wasn't a drop of her own blood on her body, but all the blood belonged to 3 girls who had recently gone missing. The police came to question Ji-hyun, but she didn't say anything. She kept repeating a scary song. Kim Dan suddenly remembered that this song was the same melody that the perverted driver sang 2 years ago. It seemed that he had returned. While Ji-hyun was still surprised, a man approached. He was Ha-min, and the prosecutor in charge of the case. Ha-min said that this song was called Westward Road. After Kim Dan left, Ha-min approached Ji-hyun and told her to stop acting. At this time, Ji-hyun's body started to convulse. She remembered what happened before she went missing. That day, her boyfriend decided to propose to her. Seeing the diamond ring, she immediately nodded in agreement. But after her boyfriend went to take a shower, she deliberately burned down the whole house. She took the opportunity to run away, but she was knocked unconscious by someone. Because the police did not find anything else, her boyfriend became a suspect. Kim Dan used her superpowers and discovered that the person who kidnapped Ji-hyun was the pervert from back then. As soon as Jae-ki heard the name of the murderer, he was immediately agitated. For the past 2 years, he has been searching everywhere for that person. He is determined to avenge his sister. Kim Dan saw Jae-ki shoot the murderer to death. Back to Ji-hyun. After being knocked out by someone, she woke up and found herself taken to an abandoned warehouse. A man holding a candle walked over. He was the perverted serial killer driver. He placed a Bible next to Ji-hyun. Then he played the song The Road to the West. Ji-hyun was locked in that warehouse for half a year. During that time, she had to eat whatever she found. This almost drove her crazy. There were also poor girls locked up in other rooms. One day, the pervert felt bored, so he decided to kill them all. Ji-hyun took that opportunity to escape. Jae-ki did not believe what Ji-hyun said, but after analyzing the bloodstains on the shirt, he discovered that only when he wore the shirt to commit the crime would the blood splatter from that angle. This also meant that Ji-hyun was the murderer. It turned out that the pervert had given her a knife and forced her to kill other women before she could leave. She felt that her life was the most precious, so she killed without hesitation. This time, she could no longer deny her crime. She revealed where she killed the other other girls. When Jae-ki heard that, he immediately ran away. Because Kim Dan had used her ability to predict where the murderer was hiding, she had seen Jae-ki shoot the murderer before. Then he did something stupid. Because she wanted to change the future, she decided to lead him in a different direction. At this time, Jae-ki had reached the warehouse and he saw the injured girls lying there. Meanwhile, Kim Dan went to the apartment where the killer was hiding. However, there was no one in the room. She was curious and turned on the light and picked up a strange device. When she turned it on, a starry sky appeared before her. When she remembered what she had just seen, she quickly called Jae-ki and told him not to come. Unexpectedly, the killer suddenly crawled out from under the bed and drugged her. At this time, Jae-ki felt something was unusual, so he immediately asked someone to investigate the location of Kim Dan's phone. After Kim Dan woke up, she found herself hanging. The pervert said that he had clearly let her escape, so why did she still let him catch her? He asked if she still remembered who he was. At this time, Kim Dan suddenly remembered the 3 friends she had played with when she was little, but those memories were very vague. The pervert said that he would save her from here and he would help her remember everything. Then he kicked the pedestal under her feet. Many years ago, at a scary orphanage, the director threw a dumpling on the ground. Then he told the children to fight over it. Whoever won would get something to eat. Those unpleasant memories haunted Kim Dan. Back to reality. When Kim Dan fell into a dangerous situation, Jae-ki appeared in time to save her. He quickly took the pervert's gun and shot off the rope that hung her. Then he aimed the gun at the pervert's head. Kim Dan suddenly realized this familiar scene. Next, Jae-ki would kill the murderer and end his own life. At that moment, the pervert suddenly revealed a shocking secret. He had no idea that the person he had harmed 2 years ago was Jae-ki's younger sister. Jae-ki's younger sister's case was not as simple as everyone thought. At that moment, other police officers also arrived. Jae-ki hurriedly continued to force the murderer to answer, but he intended to take advantage of the moment when no one was paying attention to take back the gun. In the chaos, Kim Dan took the bullet for Jae-ki and she fainted. Fortunately, her life was not in danger. She was quickly discharged from the hospital. At this time, Jae-ki asked the pervert, "Why did you kill my sister?" He replied that he was only doing what God told him to. Jae-ki did not believe what he said. That night, someone came to visit him and told him something. The next day, the criminal was taken to another prison. On the way, he pretended to cough, took out the key, and opened the handcuffs. Suddenly, he went crazy, causing the car to lose control and crash into the guardrail next to it. He took the opportunity to escape from the police car. At that moment, a police officer slowly approached from behind and took his gun. The police could have arrested the criminal, but unexpectedly, someone shot the criminal from afar. Jae-ki angrily rushed forward to ask who the mastermind behind it all was. Unexpectedly, the pervert looked at Kim Dan and told her never to forget him. At this moment, Kim Dan remembered everything. It turned out that this pervert was her childhood best friend. Kim Dan held his hand tightly. It seemed like everything happened exactly like when she was 6 years old. He said that someone was still waiting for her. Then he closed his eyes and left. At this moment, Kim Dan felt very confused. Saw the man pulling the girl back. Then she continued to see the scene of Jae-ki's younger sister being mistreated many years ago. Kim Dan told Jae-ki that before she was harmed, his younger sister was pressed on the table by the perpetrator. From there, important evidence was left. It turned out that Kim Dan only needed to hold the perpetrator's hand to see the process of committing the crime. She saw him strangling the victim's neck. Before closing his eyes, the victim left an important clue on the table. Now, Kim Dan took out a pen and drew that strange shape. It turned out to be a 2-in-1 picture, meaning from one angle it looked like a duck, but from the other angle it looked like a rabbit. The meaning of the picture was that you shouldn't let appearances fool you. After that, the two of them returned to Jae-ki's house and went to his sister's room. No one had touched this room for 2 years. However, the book containing the drawing was gone. It must have been taken by the murderer. So Jae-ki went to find his sister's best friend. It turned out that before she was murdered, his sister was investigating a missing person case from 20 years ago. Jae-ki wondered what she had seen. At the same time, Kim Dan was reviewing the video of the pervert being taken to the police station. She discovered that he was holding a key in his mouth. This proved that there was a spy in the police station. Kim Dan rearranged the details of the case. Seo-hee was harmed because she was investigating a case from 20 years ago. The pervert was just a substitute for the real mastermind. Moreover, there was a mole in the police station to help him swap DNA. When he was assassinated, the pervert left the only clue, the card box. At this time, a police officer asked Ji-hyun who killed the other women. She admitted that it was her, but the police officer wrote down the pervert's name. Ji-hyun then walked out of the interrogation room. Thanks to that, she was freed from the crime. Jae-ki was very angry. He didn't understand why Ha-min did that, but he calmly said that it was the only way to catch the mastermind. Moreover, they didn't have have any evidence to convict Ji-hyun. Jae-ki couldn't say anything more, so he could only leave angrily. Ha-min stopped Kim-dan and asked if the pervert left any message. Kim-dan sighed, and she said two names, Paulo and Bobby. Suddenly Ha-min's expression changed, but he calmed down before Kim-dan found out. To investigate the case, Jae-ki went to find his teacher at the police academy. He hoped that the teacher could help him get his job back. The teacher smiled and said that his resignation 2 years ago was not approved. Just like that, Jae-ki returned to the major crime unit. Even Kim-dan was very surprised. At this moment, Kim-dan received a phone call informing her that she had found the pervert's relic. This was important evidence. The two of them rushed to the scene. Kim-dan kicked the box open, and sure enough, they found the book that Seo-hee had left behind. A photo from more than 20 years ago fell down. Kim-dan picked it up and looked at it in amazement. Because the person in the photo looked very much like her, so she quickly took out the photo from when she was a child to compare. Was this her 20 years ago? Kim-dan had lost her memories before she was 7 years old. When she returned home, she quickly searched for her photo album, but she couldn't find any photos taken before she was 7 years old. Kim-dan asked her father if she had ever gotten lost when she was little. He said no. She asked if the missing child named Mina was really not her. Hearing this name, her father's expression changed. She continued to ask her father why her memories before she was 7 years old had disappeared. Her father explained that she had a high fever when she was little, so she had forgotten many things. To clarify the truth, Kim-dan and Jae-ki decided to drive to the location where the victim went missing. After all, there is only one district in Korea called Sanon. When Kim-dan arrived at the police station there, she discovered that the data about the missing girl had been taken by someone else. The police said that 2 years ago, a reporter had also come to investigate the case. She then went to an island. That reporter was Jae-ki's younger sister. The two immediately set out to the island to ask the people for news of Mina. After hearing this, their expressions changed. One by one, they said they didn't know anything. When the two left, they looked at them with fearful eyes. Then Kim-dan and Jae-ki came to a household. The old woman recognized her as soon as she saw her and called her Mina. She had been waiting for Mina to return for a long time. She also emphasized that a child with special abilities should absolutely not wander around. Kim-dan was surprised. The homeowner appeared and said that my mother had Alzheimer's. She called everyone Mina. Then, when the homeowner gave Kim-dan a towel, a piece of paper fell out from inside. On the paper was written that if they wanted to survive, they should quickly leave the island. That night, the village chief invited the two to have a meal. He said that there was a legend about a virgin ghost and advised them not to wander around. Late at night, the ghost appeared and stole Jae-ki's shoes. Then the two of them chased to the warehouse. They found out that the long-haired ghost was the old woman. Jae-ki took out the flyer to find someone. Unexpectedly, the old woman said the girl's name. She also said that Kim-dan was the missing Mina. Mina had a grandmother who was a famous shaman on the island. Before the old woman could finish speaking, the village chief walked in. Suddenly, the old woman was so scared that she didn't dare to speak. Then the landlord told Kim-dan that the piece of paper was sent by him. This island was very dangerous, so he hoped that the two of them could leave early tomorrow morning. Late at night, someone cut the power lines in the village, causing the entire island to lose signal. Jae-ki suddenly saw a person with a crippled leg walking in the rain. The next day, the old woman's body appeared on the beach. Unexpectedly, she had a small piece of paper in her mouth. The police opened it and found that it was a piece of the Bible. Kim-dan felt that there were many mysteries in this matter. Yesterday, the old woman still had many secrets to tell, but today, the old woman lost her life, so she thought that someone must have killed the witness to cover up the clues. Then they immediately went into the old lady's room to check. They saw a lot of chewing gum on the table. Because the old lady was born in the sea, chewing gum was an indispensable item. After chewing the gum, they could use the gum residue to plug their ears when going to the sea. This way, they could avoid water from entering. At this time, Jae-ki felt even more confused. When the old lady was young, she was called the Child of the Sea. She had dived underwater for a month and a half, so it was completely unreasonable that she died from drowning. Then the two opened the map and discovered that there was a church on the island. After 20 years, it had now become a nursing home. As soon as they entered, they were immediately stopped by the guard outside. His limping figure was very similar to the mysterious person last night. Through the camera, Jae-ki discovered that the guard had been to the old lady's house, but because there was no evidence, the two had to leave temporarily. The guard then hurriedly called the village chief to inform him of the matter. Unexpectedly, the village chief coldly told her to deal with it directly. Following Do-young's orders, he took out a gun from the storage and prepared to act. Meanwhile, the village chief dug a grave for the two. At this time, Kim-dan was searching for clues when a girl in a red shirt suddenly suddenly appeared behind a tree. Kim Dan immediately followed the girl to school. When she walked through the dusty hallway, the girl stopped in front of a wall. Then she turned her head to look at Kim Dan. This pretty girl was the image of Kim Dan when she was young. She pulled back the vines and revealed a painting of 3 children on the wall. They were Apollo, Bobby, and her. Her memories suddenly returned to her childhood. The pervert was Apollo, and she was the one who had disappeared for 20 years. She was about to talk to Jackie about this when suddenly a bullet flew straight towards her. He quickly pulled out his gun, but he discovered that the bullet had long been taken by someone else. Do Young's aim was not very accurate. This gave the two of them a chance to escape. The two then met again in the hallway. Do Young raised his gun and insisted that he was not the culprit. At the critical moment, the homeowner appeared in time, and the 3 of them joined forces to take him down. Kim Dan quickly tied him up. The village chief immediately ran over and pretended to ask why he had harmed the people on the Bafwans Island. Then, more shocking news arrived. According to the autopsy report, the old woman was drowned in fresh water, not seawater. The two of them immediately went to the well on the island, and sure enough, they found several strands of silver hair. Jackie quickly told Kim Dan to simulate the murderer's crime scene. Hearing this, she immediately assumed the role of the murderer and acted. He struggled and pushed her down against the tree next to him. While eating dinner, Kim Dan felt very itchy in her. However, her father suddenly became angry. This was the first time he showed anger towards her. It seemed that he was hiding a secret that he could not tell anyone. Kim Dan burst into tears and ran out. She also felt that her father was a stranger for the first time. The next day, a homeless person ran into the police station to beg for money. When he opened his mouth, he immediately asked for 70 billion won. This incident attracted Pastor Wong's attention. The 100 billion won from the accident was all his. This man was originally a school principal. Later, he became a pastor. Today, he was preaching to the guests. After the speech, everyone donated one by one. The money was put into an apple box to be transported to the island. Unexpectedly, an accident happened on the way and money suddenly rained from the sky. When the pastor heard that his money was taken away, he immediately felt worried. At this time, Jackie came and interrogated him. Jackie said that he had arranged for the people who took the money. The main purpose was to get the pastor to tell the truth. Jackie gave him 1 hour. 1. He had to admit that the money belonged to the church and that the church had killed 31 people 20 years ago. 2. He had to watch his 70 billion won be taken away by someone else. Pastor Wong laughed and said that they should negotiate. If Jackie gave him the money, he would give Jackie half. However, Jackie did not care. An hour had almost passed, and the pastor still did not appear. At this time, a group of men in black rushed into the police station. They were officers from the Seoul Control Bureau. They thought that the money was related to the headquarters secrets, and they wanted to take it away. Jackie wanted to stop it but could not. Then a person came forward. It was Ha Min. He thought that he was the one behind everything. However, Jackie thought that a controller like Ha Min could not have such great power. It turned out that a mysterious person had called Ha Min half an hour ago. His name was Han Ju, the most potential candidate for the position of president of Korea. The 70 billion won was his recommendation money. There were 3 people in power in Korea: Do Gyu, Han Ju, and Pastor Wong. One had power, one had money, and one had faith. Their ultimate goal was to rule the country. The Heaven's Gate 20 years ago was their work. Because the plan failed, Jackie was scolded by his superiors. In order to prevent him from acting on his own again, his superiors specially assigned him 100 outstanding cases. Unexpectedly, these ordinary cases helped him find important evidence related to the Heaven's Gate case. The first case was a delivery man who took a girl hostage. He fought with the police for 6 hours. Meanwhile, the police below did not panic at all. The girl said she had ordered food, but when she opened the door, the man barged in. Jackie laughed and told them to stop acting. The man had held a knife to her neck from the start. Second, no one would wear clothes like her to pick up the goods. Third, today is Sunday, and the delivery man didn't show up for work. Then the police arrested the two. Sure enough, they were all acting. The man was a fugitive. After being discovered, he wanted his girlfriend to cooperate in escaping. In the second case, the old woman passed away in her room. There were no signs of physical harm at the scene. Jackie found a bug on the wall, so he caught it in a box. He wanted the forensics to test the blood on it. DNA testing showed that the blood matched the old woman's son. The cause of the crime was determined to be the son's desire to take away all of his mother's property. The third case began when the victim's leg was found in the trash. The wound was cut very neatly. Jackie also judged that the murderer was left-handed. Sure enough, the murderer was the victim's husband. He was a surgeon. Just like that, it took Jackie only a week to solve almost all the pending cases. There was only one case left unfinished. It turned out that this case was related to to the prosecutor who had investigated the Heaven's Gate case. J.K. had threatened to show the investigation documents from that year. Otherwise, he would not be able to retire easily. The man seemed hesitant, but he finally took out the documents. Before leaving, he warned J.K. that this case was very complicated. If he was not careful, J.K. would be in danger of his life. At this point, J.K. no longer cared about the warnings. The documents showed that the director of the Heaven's Gate Welfare Institute 20 years ago was the current Pastor Wong. He was also a famous tycoon in Korea. Was his daughter. There was also a list of victims. The two thought they had found the key to the case, but they didn't know that there was a spy in the police station who was always watching them. J.K. and Kim Dan followed the list to find the victims' families, but the church had killed everyone. The lucky survivor also chose to hide. Kim Dan returned home in a sad mood. She bought her father a box of garlic, and the two made up. When Kim Dan went to take a bath, her father sneaked into her room. He saw the list of victims in the Heaven's Gate. Suddenly, he was extremely scared. The girl threw the popcorn on the ground. The poor children immediately ran to pick it up. The girl stood on high and laughed contemptuously at the lowly appearance of the poor children. 20 years later, she still thought her toes were worth more than the lives of others. At dinner, she picked up a piece of meat for the inspector next to her. She said that this was the food of the upper class. The poor couldn't afford it, but Minha politely refused. Ji-hyun immediately put the meat in her mouth. Do-ju, who sat opposite, angrily ordered Minha to quickly deal with J.K. and Kim Dan. He was worried that if they investigated the case related to the Heavenly Gate, everyone would be in danger. In order to find the victim's family, J.K. posted an article in the newspaper. At that time, an old man was picking up scrap. After seeing the news, he quickly borrowed a phone to call the police. His son was one of the victims of that year's case. The son said that he went to art school, but later, he somehow passed away. In the middle of the night, while the old man was picking up scrap, a kind person came and gave him water to drink. After months of suffering, the old man suddenly received attention, so he felt happy. Fortunately, J.K. appeared in time and knocked over the water bottle. The water inside the bottle tasted of bitter almonds. This showed that someone wanted to kill him to cover up the clues. In order to clarify the truth, Kim Dan asked the old man to let them perform an autopsy on his son's body. After a while of J.K. begging, the old man finally agreed. The next day, countless reporters came to the scene and started broadcasting live. The body that had been buried for 20 years was exhumed again. The Taoist priest standing nearby was surprised when he discovered the body entangled in vines. He said that this was a sign of disaster. This incident made Hanju worried. He personally went to the police station and asked to see J.K. J.K. did not expect that he had actually lured Hanju here. Hanju laughed and said to J.K., "You have to clarify the situation, or I will deal with you." J.K. affirmed that his faith was still strong. He didn't act rashly because he was young. He just wasn't afraid of challenges. Human nature is hard to change. If he could get justice for Hanju, J.K. would definitely do it. The two of them spoke words that only the other person could understand. The people around them all felt suspicious when they heard it. At this time, when Kim Dan handed over his son's bones to the forensic doctor, the results showed that the victim did not die from poisoning, but someone used force to break the victim's neck. The murderer's actions were very neat and decisive. Kim Dan remembered that her father had done this to her. She wondered if her father was the real murderer of the Heaven's Gate case. The forensic doctor told J.K. that he had also participated in that case. The prosecutor in charge of the case at that time was Hanju, and he was also very involved in the case. At this time, Hanju asked Minha to go out. Hanju told Minha to prevent the police from investigating further because there are only 2 months left before the election. As long as this period of time passes, he will become president. At that time, no matter how big the matter is, he will still be able to control it. Then, he immediately gave Minha a set of gloves. Inside was a bribe, intending that he should seize the opportunity to deal with them. At this moment, the Taoist priest grabbed the bell from Kim Dan's hand. The electric current immediately spread throughout his body. The Taoist priest said that this bell was a sacred object that was buried underground by an ancient witch. Ordinary people could not touch it. He asked her if she had ever heard the sound of resentment. At this moment, Kim Dan suddenly burst into tears. It turned out that yesterday, when she reached out to her father who was sleeping soundly, the bell rang again. The image of the corpses in the church appeared. Then, her father suddenly appeared. He squeezed her neck tightly, with an extremely fierce look. In the middle of the night, after her father woke up, he went outside to bury the iron box in the ground. Kim Dan looked inside and realized that it was the mark of the church. This meant that her father could be the culprit of the case that year. She wanted to know the truth, but she was afraid of losing her father. The Taoist priest said that she could only choose between the truth and her father. At this time, J.K. was planning to form an investigation team. Minha Min-ha suddenly came to find Jae-ki. Then Min-ha gave Jae-ki a CD and said that it was a document related to the Heaven's Gate case. To get this, Jae-ki had to let Min-ha join the investigation team. Jae-ki knew that Jae-ki had bad intentions, but the document was very important, so he agreed. In the video, Pastor Wang was very young. He was the leader of the orphanage. Every day, he gave a speech to manipulate people to listen to him. A little girl said that there were 31 people below who had turned red. The video then stopped. The group members immediately gave their opinions. At that time, the incident had not yet happened. They wondered how the little girl knew that there would be 31 victims. At this moment, Kim Dan felt nauseous, so she quickly ran outside. Min-ha told everyone to pay attention to the person filming this video. There was a reflection on the window. Through the glass, one could see a blurry outline of him. The 31 people were the victims whose necks he had broken. Kim Dan felt that the man was her father. She used the excuse of feeling unwell to leave. On the way home, she saw the man fall from the sky with her own eyes. She quickly ran over. He seemed to be muttering something. It sounded like the end of the world was coming. This psychic used the dog to convey his message. The dog bit the bracelet on Kim Dan's hand. She immediately saw all of its memories. A year ago, it was still a stray dog. Kind man took it home. The two of them played happily together. When the man was resting, it jumped up and lay on his lap. However, just a few minutes before, it had witnessed its owner being pushed down the stairs, so it desperately rushed towards the culprit and bit the woman's leg. But it was too small to avenge its owner. Kim Dan witnessed everything with her superpower, but unfortunately, she could not see the culprit's face clearly. Kim Dan could only be sure that the culprit was a woman, and her left leg was injured. But unfortunately, Kim Dan's superpower could only assist them in the investigation and could not provide direct evidence. The next day, Kim Dan and Jae-ki went to the man's funeral. Then Jae-ki saw the victim's wife. Suddenly, his whole body felt like it was being electrocuted. The reason was because the wife was too beautiful. It turned out that the victim was a top entertainment tycoon in Korea. The woman had been married to him for less than 2 years. At this time, the church suddenly played The Road to the West. This was the theme song of that church. Kim Dan looked up, and sure enough, he realized that something was wrong. Suddenly, the victim's sister rushed over and slapped the victim's wife in the face. She said, "You are the unlucky one who caused my brother to lose his life." Then she used force to force the wife's head to kneel down in front of the church. She forced the wife to kowtow repeatedly. When Kim Dan learned about the victim's sister, she knew that she was not a good person. She had been eyeing her brother's property for a long time. The two often argued with each other. Moreover, she also had a wound on her leg. Kim Dan asked what the wound was from. The woman stammered that a few days ago, her leg was caught in a door. In the wife's eyes, her husband was a good man. Although the two were 47 years apart, their life was still very happy. Therefore, the older sister became even more suspicious. Kim Dan commented that the wife's face resembled the murderer. Jae-ki did not agree with that subjective opinion. At the hospital, the wife was feeding her mother-in-law, but the mother refused to open her mouth. At this time, Kim Dan opened the door and walked in. Jae-ki deliberately broke the vase. The girl quickly bent down to clean up. He took the opportunity to grab her arm. She was frightened. He immediately understood what was happening. That night, the wife went to the balcony and was about to do something stupid. Luckily, Kim Dan was able to hold her back. They discovered that there were 3 demons hiding in her body. It turned out that she had killed her 3 husbands. Kim Dan reached out and touched her belly. She was pregnant, but because the mother herself had done many evil deeds, the child in her womb had passed away. Yeonhwa was frightened by these words. She immediately turned around and pressed Kim Dan down on the railing. She kept saying that she wanted to push Kim Dan down. Kim Dan was still a police officer after all. Kim Dan pulled the girl's hand and spun her around. Then the two of them changed positions. Only then did Yeonhwa confess that she had secretly committed the crime. She did not understand why Kim Dan suspected her. It turned out that the last time Jae-ki touched her arm, he discovered a broken bone. At the same time, he also discovered that the corner of her eye had 3 moles identical to the girl in the Heaven's Gate video. Apollo also came from a welfare home. He had many broken bones on his body. This proved that the two of them most likely grew up in the same welfare home. Therefore, Kim Dan went to Yeonhwa to ask why she immediately donated her assets to the church after her husband passed away. She had no intention of answering at all, but she had put sleeping pills in the tea. She was mentally prepared to kill Kim Dan at any moment. While she was talking, she received a call from Pastor Wang. He told her to jump off the building immediately to avoid being exposed. That was the reason for the scene that happened just now. At this moment, Yeonhwa suddenly burst out laughing and said that even if Kim Dan had supernatural powers, the police could not convict her without evidence. Kim Dan angrily punched her in the face. After returning to the police station, Kim Dan was scolded. This case was exactly like the Apollo case 2 years ago. They clearly knew who the culprit was, but they were powerless to arrest her. Looking at the leader's gold tooth, Kim Dan suddenly had a great idea. She walked over and opened the leader's mouth. When she saw the chili in his mouth, she felt happy. She said the dog bit the killer's leg, so they just need to take its saliva and do a DNA test. Then compare the results with the victim's wife to confirm whether the killer is her or not. After the results came out, Kim Dan didn't say anything. Kim Dan just brought the results and went to Yeonhwa's side. Then she suddenly lifted up Yeonhwa's skirt. Sure enough, she discovered a dog bite. The DNA test results were completely identical. At the same time, Kim Dan also discovered photos on Yeonhwa's phone. It turned out that she had a hobby of taking photos after committing a crime. She kept them all as souvenirs. She had previously bought insurance for 3 husbands, and the compensation money would be donated to the church. It seemed that Pastor Wang was the one controlling her. In order to break Yeonhwa's psychological defenses, Kim Dan lied that Pastor Wang had been arrested. Yeonhwa didn't believe it, but soon she saw him in the interrogation room. Because she wanted to save him, she intended to take all the blame on herself. Just a few minutes ago, Pastor Wang was still doing charity work on the street. Some vagrants intentionally caused a small accident and soiled his clothes. They took the opportunity to take his wallet and handed it over to the police. So Pastor Wang came here to get his lost wallet back. It turned out that it was all Jae Ki's plan. He took out the video from the orphanage 20 years ago. Yeonhwa looked at it and admitted that the girl in it was her. Then she started talking about her childhood. 20 years ago, at the orphanage, she had to learn the skills of fraud every day. Any child who did something wrong would be beaten. Jeon-soo was the smartest child in the orphanage. He was the only one who was not punished. Every day, the orphanage provided the children with a meal. Besides rice, there was only soup. For the growing children, this meal was not enough. Jeon-soo always gave his food to his friends. In addition, the director often threw the dumplings on the ground for the children to fight over. If any child was injured, he would personally break the child's arm. Then he went to the insurance company to claim compensation. He said that they fell and injured themselves. He claimed money once a month. This helped him earn quite a bit of income. Under such circumstances, the only hope in the children's eyes was Pastor Wang. He often brought them bread. In their eyes, the kind pastor was the embodiment of love, but they didn't know that he wasn't a good person either. He used psychological trauma to build trust with the children. Even though he only gave a little kindness, what he received in return was absolute loyalty. Even when the children grew up, they still listened to him very much. They were even willing to sacrifice their lives for him. To this day, he still brings bread to the children regularly. The purpose is to cultivate loyalty in their hearts. In Yeonhwa's memory, she remembers a special friend. Mina is not an orphan, but she came with her mother. Hearing this, Kim Dan was very surprised. In her hazy memory, her mother's figure indeed appeared, but she could not see her mother's face clearly. It was in this hellish situation that children became close to each other. That night, Minha went to the police station to convey Pastor Wang's instructions to Yeonhwa. 1. She chose to do something foolish. 2. She should keep quiet about everything. The girl smiled happily because she thought that Pastor John was about to open the door to heaven for her. Seeing Minha's figure leave, she waved goodbye. Then she said something strange. Goodbye to Jeon-soo. It turned out that Ha-min was the smart boy. Jeon-soo, who always gave his food to his friends. However, at this time, he still did not know Kim Dan's true identity. In the evening, the two of them sat outside waiting for food. A second later, a car lost control and rushed towards them. Kim Dan immediately grabbed Minha's hand and pulled her back. He immediately remembered the scene where she pulled him away. At this time, Kim Dan's wallet fell to the ground. Minha discovered a photo that fell out. In the photo, she was with a man. That man was Kim Dan's father. In another development, Doo-ju was holding a supporter meeting. He hugged the people in a friendly manner. At this time, Pastor Wang got out of the car. The moment he saw Kim Dan, he was extremely surprised. Kim Dan did not say anything. She just walked over and held his hand. She closed her eyes and saw the people go to the rooftop. Then they jumped down under the pressure of a man. Once again, she witnessed the scene that happened 20 years ago. Now she realized that the man in front of her wanted to continue to harm everyone, so she decided to use the name of an angel to judge him. The pastor panicked when he realized that this scene was very familiar. 20 years ago, a little girl had said such words to him. Returning to the church, Pastor Wang ordered his subordinates to deal with Kim Dan. Then the subordinates kept knocking on Kim Dan's door. Her father was inside the house, carefully taking out a knife because he knew that he could no longer hide everything. In the middle of the night, he hid important documents in the public cabinet. When he got home, he saw his daughter sitting on the sofa waiting for him. Suddenly, Kim Dan took out a photo and asked her father if he had harmed someone. son and his own daughter that year. He knew that he could no longer hide it, so he deliberately said cold words to her. Then he slapped her hard and chased her out of the house. Kim Dan cried out of anger as she walked down the street. However, her father did this because he wanted to protect her. In order to find out the pastor's intentions, Jakey decided to approach the adopted children at the orphanage. He played soccer with them to build trust. At this time, Jakey touched the children's hands and discovered that they were all very healthy and had no injuries. Kim Dan felt suspicious. She wondered if he had changed. A little girl said that Pastor Wong was very kind, but there was a rumor in the orphanage that every second Monday of the month, the ghost statue in the garden would come to life and take away anyone who dared to look at it. The children were all very scared. Jakey thought it was just a child's imagination. However, he did not expect that that night, a really scary thing happened. In the middle of the night, it was raining heavily, and the 5-year-old boy in the orphanage went missing. At this time, Kim Dan, who was several hundred kilometers away, also sensed danger, so she quickly drove to the orphanage with Jakey. When she and Jakey woke up the children, they found that a boy had disappeared. The boy's roommate said that the boy had been kidnapped by a white ghost. It was exactly like the statue outside. At this time, Pastor Wong came and denied responsibility. Kim Dan scolded him as a pervert. Then the police posted a notice online. After 3 days, there was still no news of the boy. The police discovered that since the orphanage was established, many children had gone missing because they had no parents. No one called the police to look for them. Kim Dan took out a drawing and brought her consciousness back to the crime scene. In the hallway, a strange figure appeared. Kim Dan slowly approached, and she discovered that the person who took the boy away was a nurse. At this time, the boy was in Jinwang Hospital. This was the hospital that Pastor Wong opened. In his office, he was angry with his daughter. It turned out that Ji Hun had planned this kidnapping. She is currently Hanju's personal assistant. He is having a hard time during the election. He is sitting in his office, but he is worried about his nephew who needs a kidney transplant. The main source of kidneys is the children in the orphanage. When Jakey arrived at the hospital, the surgery was about to begin. The moment the doctor picked up the knife, the fire alarm suddenly rang. It turned out that Jakey had set fire to the fire alarm sensor. At this time, the doctor did not dare to act. The police arrived. Pastor Wong dragged his daughter and ran away. She was immediately arrested for kidnapping. Thanks to that, the children in the orphanage were saved by the police. In fact, they were just tools of the rich. When he got home, Pastor Wong was very angry, and he immediately planned revenge. Kim Dan had just returned home when she was knocked unconscious by his subordinates. Jakey called her, but on the other end of the line he heard a man's voice. Jakey understood that Kim Dan was in danger. Pastor Wong said that Kim Dan's father had an important videotape. He gave them 5 hours to hand it over. Otherwise, he would make Kim Dan disappear forever. He then slapped her repeatedly and then strangled her. Suddenly, she raised her head and said that he had a 2-year-old son who had passed away that year. He was terrified when he heard that. He immediately asked her how she knew that. She replied that it was because he had done too many bad things and bad fate had befallen his son. If he did not repent, his daughter would meet the same fate. He grabbed her collar in panic. He frantically asked how she knew about this, because even his wife did not know. But in just a moment, Kim Dan suddenly woke up and she looked at him blankly, not understanding what was going on. She said that she had just fallen asleep and did not know anything. Pastor Wong quickly ordered someone to take her away. 10 minutes later, Jakey arrived. He said that he wanted to see the hostage first. Seeing that Kim Dan was safe and sound, he felt more at ease. Then he secretly winked at her. Then he secretly left the key on the ground. Next, he took Pastor Wong to find the tape. He chased his subordinates out. Then he played the tape, but the content inside was about a teacher teaching English. Knowing that he had been tricked, he was angry and wanted to attack Jakey. But at this time, the police had ambushed and arrested the kidnappers. At this time, Kim Dan had also removed the handcuffs and she beat the kidnappers up. She thought everything was under control, but unexpectedly, Kim Dan's father was in danger. When Pastor Wong entered the office, a gun was pointed at his head. Kim Dan's father said that Pastor Wong knew better than anyone what kind of person he was and what he could do. Then he shot the guard standing behind him. Seeing that the pastor's life was about to end, Min-ha hurried over. Min-ha announced that Kim Dan was kidnapped and she was in danger. Because he loved her, her father put down his weapon. He decided to take Min-ha to get the tape. He entered the password and gave it to Min-ha. He thought that just like that, the kidnappers would release his daughter. Unexpectedly, Min-ha pointed a gun at him. Then Min-ha said that he was the boy Yunsu from back then. In the past, Kim Dan's father had tortured Yunsu many times. Kim Dan's father immediately knelt down and begged for forgiveness. He said that he could die, but he just hoped that the kidnappers would release his daughter. Min-ha didn't say much but ordered someone else to take Kim Kim Dan's father away. After Kim Dan escaped, she immediately called her father. Her father said that he was on his way home. He then gave her an address and told her that if anything happened, she should come there. Before she could understand what was happening, her father fell to the ground. It turned out that he had been seriously injured. Before he left, he held his daughter's hand. At this moment, the bell in her hand rang, and all of her father's memories from 7 years ago immediately appeared in her mind. Her father only needed to place his hand on the patient's head and chant a spell to scare away the disease in the patient's body. He watched his daughter wake up and his heart was filled with joy. He then quickly went to buy new shoes for his daughter. However, when he returned, he discovered that she was no longer breathing. It turned out that the moment just now was just a flashback. The mother had sought out Pastor Wong for help. Her daughter inherited the witch blood of the family. The girl has special eyes that can see scary things. Her mother wants to cure her daughter, but she did not expect that she would put her daughter in danger. From the outside, this place looks like it takes in and takes care of orphans, but in fact, it is a place where children are turned into experimental subjects. Their daily job is to manipulate the psychology of the elderly to get money. Kim Dan's father was originally a spy agent, but at that time, he became a subordinate of Pastor Wong. His job is to deal with those who do not listen. Pastor Wong promised to open the door to heaven so that he and his daughter can meet again. Meanwhile, Kim Dan's mother went to a rich man's house to work. The TV reported about a controller named Han Ju, so the mother decided to write a letter to Han Ju to expose the orphanage's conspiracy. Jeonsu would take the letter out while she was at school, so Han Ju also appeared at the orphanage. He entered the room and scolded Pastor Wong and Du Gyu for crimes such as illegal detention, insurance theft, and child abuse. Of course, Han Ju brought clear evidence, but surprisingly, Han Ju said he could help the people there escape punishment. In return, he needed their help to do something. The next day, a rich pregnant woman came to the orphanage. She was pregnant with Han Ju's child. Han Ju did not want his reputation to be affected, so he asked Du Ju to kill her to silence her. In the church, Pastor Wong still played the good guy. He claimed that he knew nothing about what Do Ju had done. At the same time, Pastor Wong publicly dismissed Do Ju from his position. The pastor also declared that he would seek justice for everyone. On Christmas Eve, a high-ranking leader came to visit. At the rehearsal, Mina discovered that 31 people sitting in the row of seats had turned red. The pastor wanted to use Kim Dan's father to get rid of everyone. The believers at the orphanage had their first delicious dinner. They were very happy. However, Kim Dan's father knew the truth, so he couldn't eat. After dinner, Jeonsu poured wine for everyone. Everyone drank it all and immediately vomited blood. Pastor Wong told Du Gyu to lock the door and drive away. Kim Dan's father's duty was not to leave any witnesses, and then he would die too. However, the feeling of being poisoned was too painful, so they begged Kim Dan's father to help them. Thus, he helped everyone escape from the pain. Jeonsu was scared by this scene. Mina hid Jeonsu behind the stage. Then she went to find Kim Dan's father alone. He originally wanted to get rid of her, but right after that, Mina told him the words of his daughter before she died. He was surprised and hugged Mina and quickly ran away. Mina also brought the tape. Meanwhile, Jeonsu was left inside and met Han Ju. Han Ju gave him a package of poison and gave Jeonsu two choices. One was that from now on, Jeonsu would be Han Ju's subordinate, or two, the boy would lose his life. To save his life, Jeonsu made the first choice. The case ended just like that. Kim Dan had eyes with the ability to see the existence of demons. Her colleagues decided to take her to see a wise man. They hoped to find a way to solve this problem for her. At this moment, a butterfly flew over the old woman. The old woman immediately guessed that a visitor was coming. Sure enough, half an hour later, Kim Dan and Jae-ki arrived. The old woman told Jae-ki that he could go and leave Kim Dan here. Jae-ki was very uneasy, so he asked the old woman's identity. The old woman replied that she was Kim Dan's grandmother. Jae-ki was really surprised. The old woman told her granddaughter to go inside. Kim Dan turned around and called her father to come in with her. Only then did the old woman discover that there were 32 souls behind Kim Dan. They were all victims of the Heaven's Gate. The 32nd soul was her father. He had just passed away and was leading the remaining souls. These souls were always following Kim Dan. At this time, Minha showed the tape to Han Ju. Han Ju only asked Minha if he had seen the content inside. Minha quickly denied it. He said that he still wanted to live. Han Ju seemed satisfied. He immediately destroyed destroyed the tape. Minha then went to Jae-ki and said that he would not pretend anymore. He admitted that he was Jeon-soo. Jae-ki felt hatred from Minha. From then on, Jae-ki always targeted Minha. When he had free time, Jae-ki would report on Minha's speeding, littering, going to the bathroom, accessing bad websites, and many other things. These actions made Minha laugh. Minha thought that Jae-ki must have run out of ways to deal with him, so he used these childish tricks. But in fact, Jae-ki was actually waiting for a strong counterattack. At this time, Kim Dan was still on the mountain with her grandmother. The two of them did not sense the danger approaching. Kim Dan heard her father's voice. He said that he wanted to leave with her, but she discovered that her father's crippled legs were walking normally, while she was limping. Her father walked faster and faster until she could no longer see his figure. She chased after him and realized that her father had turned into a different person. 32 spirits appeared at this place. They stared at her. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Kim Dan was so scared that she knelt down. At this moment, her father slowly approached. Looking at his mouth shape, she guessed that he said the two words, hot pot and grilled meat. Kim Dan woke up from her dream. Her grandmother said that it was not hot pot but grilled meat. Sure enough, there was a fierce fire outside. The mastermind blocked the doors and lit a fire outside. Kim Dan used all her strength to escape. If she and her grandmother did not wake up, they would really have become grilled meat. Actually, the spirits had come to save her. She followed her grandmother's gaze. She saw her father standing in the middle of the yard, and she was immediately moved. Whether he was alive or dead, her father had always protected her. She decided not to let herself be sad anymore. She was determined to make the bad guys confess. Her grandmother said that her soul had been upgraded. Now she could destroy the demons. 32 spirits looked at her with hope. Then Minha and Ji-hyun's engagement ceremony took place. The main characters were all here. Hanju wanted to use Minha to quickly receive the property. Halfway through the ceremony, some powerful figures came to congratulate. At this time, the chandelier suddenly shook and fell. Kim Dan was terrified. It turned out that everything was a vision of the future. Kim Dan saw that Ji-hyun was about to take action, so she quickly told Jae-ki to shoot. Everyone was scared and quickly lay down on the ground. Ji-hyun's plan failed. In the prison, Do-ju said he wanted to meet Kim Dan. Now he realized that he was just a tool of Han-ju. The important thing was that he had evidence to prove the other party's crimes. That was the church's ledger. All sources of money and expenses were recorded. Besides him, there were two people who knew about this ledger. One was Kim Dan's father,